Good evening. My name is Bob Liff, and this is the CUNY Forum, a monthly town meeting that brings prominent New Yorkers together with faculty and students of the Edward T. Rogowsky Internship Program in Government and Public Affairs. When Democrat Jim Hightower was the populous Texas Agriculture Commissioner in 1980, he spoke out against the go-along, get-along mentality that saw the path to success as seeking out the middle ground so as not to offend anyone who might vote for you. There's nothing in the middle of the road but a yellow stripe and dead armadillos, he famously said. That was a time when Ronald Reagan was ascending to the presidency, ushering in a period of rising ideology-driven partisanship that has reached its zenith or its nadir under Donald Trump. With the exception of Bill Clinton's attempt to govern by triangulation, public debates appear to have abandoned the political center, where most issues were traditionally resolved, and retreated to media echo chambers where those who don't agree with you become enemies, not just opponents. We certainly see that in Republican politics, where candidates jostle to see who can blow the right-wing Trumpian racial dog whistle most loudly to exploit fears that the United States is soon to be a majority-minority country. The U.S. Census in 2017 showed that for the first time, there's been an absolute decline in the nation's non-Hispanic white population. And for the first time, minorities outnumber whites among every age group from 0 to 9. And we see in the recent Democratic primaries in New York, where the establishment held serve at the top with Governor Cuomo's renomination, a group of progressive candidates, some allied with the Democratic Socialists of America, swept out state senators from the former Independent Democratic Caucus, who critics say helped Republicans control Albany's upper legislative chamber. The former reporter in me says the prospect of a blue wave that could see Democrats retake the U.S. House and maybe the Senate is an important and fascinating development, one that is partly ideological, partly generational, and partly an old-fashioned throw-the-bums-out phenomenon. But the civic activist in me, who believes progress measured in half a loaf or even a few slices is preferable to a regressive status quo afflicting too many working and poor people in this city and country, worries that the kind of incremental social progress our politics has been able to deliver is beyond the willingness of ideologues to achieve. We're joined today by 4 New Yorkers who are engaged in debate over the state of our politics. Do we continue to lurch from left to right and back again as the political center hollows out? Francis Fox Piven is the Distinguished Professor of Political Science and Sociology at the CUNY Graduate School, has a long career as a scholar and advocate on poverty programs and the poor, and has been a board member of the Democratic Socialists of America. Deborah DeVejan is the founder and chief citizen office of thechisel.com, which is trying to recraft that bipartisan political center. Jaime Estadas is adjunct professor of social policy and advocacy at Columbia University and the president of the Latino Leadership Institute. And Harry Siegel is a columnist with the Daily Beast and the Daily News, who will tell us what it all means. Francis, let me start with you. It's not that long ago socialism was a very dirty word in politics. And in the 1960s, they warned about creeping socialism. I guess I was a creeping socialist at the time. What's changed? All of a sudden, DSA is a label that is being successful among voters.
Well, notice that they're saying democratic socialist. And the striking thing about this label, democratic socialist, is that it is put at the top of a program that is a New Deal democratic program. And there's nothing about it. It doesn't come from a foreign country. It doesn't come from Karl Marx. It comes from FDR and FDR's brain trust. When they say Medicare for all, well, FDR was thinking about a national health insurance program, and almost every country, rich country in the world has a national health insurance program. Or they talk about free college tuition. Well, most countries, rich countries in the world, don't make their college students go into debt up to here in exchange for a college education. What they're talking about is run-of-the-mill stuff in the rich, reasonably progressive, but not very progressive. You don't have to be very progressive to be for this stuff. Countries of the world. And when you ask Americans, not whether they're right or left, not whether they're Trump or Hillary or Bertie or whatever, but he asked them about the programs. Right. Do you think we should have Medicare for all? Large majorities of Americans want Medicare for all. They want free college tuition. They want the kinds of social supports that responsible governments have come to give to their citizens. So I think...
Let me Jaime, you do a lot of work in the Latino community and train, you know, the Latino Leadership Institute trains a lot of particularly Latino candidates, but, you know, candidates of color who then turn around and run for office. In the phenomenon of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was the Democratic Social of America candidate who beat Congressman Joe Crowley in a stunning upset, in Julia Salazar, who had a very bizarre habit of lying about her background, but managed to win a sizable victory in Bushwick. But yet they are not, and they appeal that we're running to protect against gentrification, but yet they're getting their votes from precisely the younger people who don't have this baggage of the word socialism, and they are the gentrifying people.
Okay, first I agree 100% with Dr. Piven said. There is a new class consciousness being developed, working class consciousness being developed in this country. I think that working people and poor people, they are no longer thinking in terms of the alternatives from a Democratic Party or a Republican Party. I think that they see the Republican and Democratic Party as franchises, like any corporation that has a brand name. For example, Ocasio is a Democratic Socialist, but decided to run in the primaries of the Democratic Party. The same did Sanders. Trump, who knows what he is, but he ended up running as a Republican. They are using those franchises, those brand names, in order for them to basically use it as a vehicle to get elected. The new class consciousness, working class consciousness, is basically saying, we don't care about names or the stigma that socialism has. We just want to make sure that we got affordable housing, that we have quality health care, that we have minimum wage that is appropriate, and that's what they're interested. The issue with the franchises is like they operate like McDonald's and Burger King, you know? The only difference is that one of them may give you a little bit of more ketchup, which is the joke that I always make, and those tends to be the Democrat. But I think that this new class consciousness that has been created is being created due to the frustration with the Democratic Party and with the Republican Party, because it has never attended the needs of poor and working class. And they're tired of that. And now they don't care if it's socialism. By the way, let me say one thing. Socialism has always, since FDR, has always bailed out capitalism when capitalism messed up. You know, the depression of the 1930s, the recession of the 2008, is socialism who's always rescued capitalism from the mistakes or the original sins that they bring with them.
Well, it's an argument that the 1930s was socialism to help the poor, and 2008 was socialism for the rich, in which, you know,
exactly,
which the risk was assumed socialistically, and the profit.
But the monies came from the state, right, in the literal definition.
Deborah, we're talking about some pretty dramatic changes. I think what's going on with the DSA, and I do think that's a very powerful word that had incredible resonance when I grew up in the 1960s. The Chisel just did a mammoth survey of people on the left, on the right, and the center, and you found there's this tremendous common ground on what people believe on issues. But that's kind of from 30,000 feet. And when you get down at street level, where you have to, frankly, cut the deals to you know, create a program, is that, I mean, does the center exist?
Well, I think it totally exists, and I think there are two elements to the answer. The first is that over the years, and I think to your point, Jaime, this notion that these two parties have been increasingly franchising themselves and as a result disenfranchising more and more of the middle is really problematic, because now we're at a point where there are almost 43% of Americans who don't identify as a Republican or a Democrat. So we have disenfranchised effectively 43% of the American electorate. they don't know what to do. They can't participate in primaries. And so the right and the left, in the way of the traditional parties, are going further right and further left. And that's where the source of all the screaming and hollering is coming. The people in the middle are either apathetic or they're so fed up they don't want any part of it. To answer your question with regard to the study, so we just did this survey, and you guys can grab a copy of the book as you like. I have a lot of extra copies for you all. What we did is we're looking at the world in 3 levels. The first is, what are our shared values? The second is, let's establish common ground of facts. And the third is, let's figure out the tactical solutions. What everybody's looking for today is a wave your magic wand and figure out how do we get everybody around the table, or how do we get to the tactical solution. You can't get to the tactical solution until you've established a set, or you've explored the shared values that we do share. And we found in left, right, and center, in 74% of the time, of the 34 major issues that we looked at, left, right, and center all had as the same top goals the same things. And these are aspirational goals. Then you go into the next level in which you say, okay, I'm going to bring together folks from the NRA and folks from the Brady campaign to prevent gun violence. And let's put together what we call chisel bits, which are issue backgrounders, or what are the main issues that Americans need to know when it comes to the facts. And it'll blow you away, because left, right, and center kind of said, we believe these are the facts. Now we can go and we can make some tactical decisions together in terms of where we go, because we've realized we don't want to kill each other as we sit around a table. We can now break bread together. We can establish a common ground of facts on which we can then determine the tactical solutions, and we're increasingly doing that.
Harry, we've been looking at this stuff for a long time. You know, she talks about tactics. I think that's actually a pretty good word. If we look at Albany, for instance, there are those who argue that the governor was quite happy to have divided government in the legislature, because he was able to either, play one off against the other, but it also required everybody to ultimately, whether it was the 3 men in the room, there were still no women in the room, whether it was 3 men in the room, you had to come to some agreement in order to get anything done. Is that too idealistic to look at it that way?
Well, if you're 18 and you managed to figure out how to vote in New York, and you realized you had to be a Democrat for your vote to mean anything, because the primaries decide most of these contests.
In New York City, right.
And you were, 9/11 happened right after you were born. The economy's been lousy. Your parents did okay here, but the odds that you're going to match where they're at are very low. You're living with roommates and thinking about how much debt you want to take on, and looking at people 10 years older than you who are depressed, who are less likely, if they're still in New York, to be married or hold relationships. The cost of being here is just too high. And you look at the politicians we've had in Albany, they're a profoundly unpleasant bunch. They never get voted out of office. They all seem to end up going to jail or getting deeply investigated.
The only way you leave office is, death, indictment, or becoming a judge.
Right. But that changed this year, and it changed a lot because young people, many of whom I don't think were super well informed and are coming to terms with their politics, said, how do I get involved? And how do I get involved locally? And started organizing and started figuring some of this out. So we were talking before about Julia Salazar, who was this candidate who told a bunch of lies about her identity. And she was this DSA candidate because of her identity. And the DSA is promoting itself in a lot of ways, and especially after Ocasio-Cortez, they needed a second win as proof of concept. If you go back like a year, they were supporting this council guy who wanted to be on the council here, Jabari, who got crushed. They're actually not a potent political force exactly. They're just a bunch of young people who are looking to get involved and are saying the limits of what's possible and how that's being discussed seem ridiculous to us. So the center is shifting dramatically, but I don't think that this ends the politics of consensus. You have a Democratic coalition, I think, in both houses in Albany come November, and that'll be brand new. So to go back a step, when Cuomo comes to office, right, you had 2 previous governors. You had Eliot Spitzer, who was a steamroller and a disaster, and then there were prostitutes. And then you had David Patterson, who gave a press conference with his wife next to him, and is like, I cheated on my wife and with my staff, and I did a lot of cocaine, but she did it too. So when Spitzer comes in, when Cuomo comes in, and he's competent, and he needs some middle to negotiate with, and he passes a budget on time, and he doesn't embarrass himself, which, by the way, he's more than capable of doing. He'd run for governor previously and really embarrassed himself and had an ugly divorce in the middle and all sorts of other stuff. That was good enough. 10 years later, 12 years later, 8 years later, That doesn't seem like enough to a lot of people who are getting fed up. Given the alternatives, it's probably going to be good enough. Come November, it was more than good enough for the primary. But you had 7 incumbents lose, 6 of them members of this IDC who were Democrats who caucused with the Republican and made some deals and actually got stuff done, and like democratic stuff done. But they did that in exchange for taking other issues off the table and saying, we'd love to get this done, but the Republicans are in charge, so what can we do? A lot of big things off the table. They just got swept away. So instead of having to die or get arrested to change the dynamics in Albany, a quarter of the state Senate caucus, the Democrats, just changed. And they're going to have very different leadership and very different dynamics, and the range of the possible is going to happen. And these people may well screw up. They're going to have vetting issues. They just had, even though she won, like a legitimately embarrassing candidate who I think will be treated initially as a freak show in Albany. When the press is bored, every slow day, she's going to be who they go to as a story. And I'm betting won't run for another term. She wanted to be the vessel for this movement. And I'm betting they'll find better vessels over time. And that if the center we've had can't provide things that people want, it's going to get washed away. And I'm not going to shed that many tears for what we lose in predictability or even worry that much about the damage to come. I think we're moving away from a model, I would argue, of proven failure.
Let me throw this out. One of the questions I raised about what happened in this last election, was it generational? Was it ideological? Or was it just throw the bums out?
Well,
or all of the above?
A lot of people were very angry at both political parties. And I want to underline, they were also angry at the Democrats. We're getting all this pro-Obama frosting. It's all pink and light and so forth. But in fact, Obama did a lot of things that people should be very angry about, including ignoring the town of Flint and the poisoned water. Horrific things. And his response to the Great Recession was to bail out the banks and not do very much at all for people who were losing their jobs or working at low wages and losing their homes. Look at how many millions of people lost their homes as a result of the Great Recession.
And are still underwater, many people.
Yeah, and Obama was the president. So, but, it's bigger than Obama and it's bigger than Trump. Oh, it's easy to be bigger than Trump, I think, but, and it's bigger than the individuals who occupy positions of authority. Over the last 40 years, the United States has changed dramatically. We've gone from being an industrial society with a lot of thriving factories and thriving people and dense, busy, bustling towns, and all of a sudden, people started wondering, the factories closed down, the machinery was shipped abroad. The people who had always thought, well, their kids are going to grow up to be like them. Their sons will go work in the automobile plant or in the steel plant, and their daughter will be fine. There was no future. Everything that was familiar was crumbling. Their neighborhoods were crumbling. The houses were boarded up. I mean, if you go through the United States by automobile or car, or if you don't take a plane, if you travel around and you look at these towns, it's horrific. And people were living in this town. This was a kind of rootlessness, a kind of anomie, deracination. Their world was being transformed, and they didn't know what the future would bring. Now, when this happens to people, they do become susceptible to strong men politicians who say, I can do it. I am the smartest guy in the world, and I was only president for 60 days, and I was better than Abe Lincoln. This is...
But
Well, we have.
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, I agree with you totally. I mean, we've decimated the country in so many ways, but we've decimated it because we're looking at symptoms all the time. We're not proactively looking at what the problem is to avoid it. And so when you look at what happened in Detroit, and this country is quickly becoming Detroit all over the country, whether you're talking about urban areas or rural areas, we're becoming Detroit because two things happened in Detroit beginning about 50 years ago. Management got fat and happy, and the unions said, we just want to keep on making more money. So everybody wants to blame everybody, but it is a collective responsibility that management and unions weren't talking with each other and saying, we need to figure out how to be innovative together and how to push it so that we will retain competitiveness throughout the country, or more importantly, throughout the world. And so as a result, there was a great deal of, thrashing of arms and flailing and so on. And so as a result, things went poof. In a similar fashion, we should have been, our political institutions, our regulatory agencies should have been able to identify what was going on with the subprime mortgage. People were getting loans left and right who had no money, who had no justification for getting those homes. Shame on the bankers for getting those brokerage fees. Shame on the banks for letting it happen. But as importantly, shame on our political institutions for allowing this to happen. It's happening in front of our eyes. So it's our responsibility to be checking on our regulatory agencies. It's our responsibility to be checking on the managements. It's our responsibility to be making sure that our neighbors are okay and not getting themselves involved in some crazy, hairy scheme that's going to end up putting everybody underwater. And
But in order for that to happen, you need to have institutions and groups and organizations that basically are organized within the community in order to put a check on others.
Right, but
for example, when you mention unions, I don't see any problems with unions trying to get the best deal that they can get for their members.
Wait,
for example, let me say this.
Sorry.
In Germany, for example, there is no minimum wage. You know why in Germany there is no minimum wage? Because there are so many unions there. There is no need for minimum wage because the unions negotiate for the members the best deals that they can. And there is no attempt by the government in order to get rid of the unions like happens in the United States. So the unions, they have to fight back. Now, you have a decision like Janus that basically comes from the Supreme Court of the United States that basically diminish the power to bargain from the unions.
From public employees.
And let's be clear, the Supreme Court is an instrument of the state because that's how it was set up in the Constitution of the United States. And it's not an independent, neutral institution. It's a political institution, and then you have that institution diminishing the powers of workers,
You know who hated public sector unions? LaGuardia. He called them headless nails. And the labor movement got very overcommitted to public sector unions because the private sector ones got beaten up and the rules kept shifting to make it harder and harder for those workers to organize. And they left themselves very vulnerable to this sort of Supreme Court decision that effectively just says, makes it much easier for you to not pay dues and to continue to collect the benefits and thus to free ride, if you will.
The free ride, yes.
But there is something very complicated in having public sector unions that are negotiating directly with their employers and having those at the heart of the labor movement. And what we've started to see since Occupy, really, is labor trying to start to figure this out. And so you mentioned franchises before, brilliantly, I thought. And both parties are hollowed out, but you've seen big unions suddenly try to start organizing fast food workers, who they'd given up on before because franchises.
Also accepted, it took them a while to accept immigrants.
Yes, and car washers and
point.
Yeah, all these other groups, they just sort of given up on. They're too hard to organize. There's too much outsourcing, and we can't figure out who the workers are. So when you get back to the grassroots and to trying to organize and trying to hold some sort of labor floor, that has to be local work. It demands that people pay attention, and the danger is that you get as much of this as you can done through the big man. In New York, that's Andrew Cuomo. So he reaches a deal to get the airport workers up to 15, and the Daily News, where I was at the editorial board at the time.
Deal,
yeah, we were instrumental in that, and that's good, and that's a useful start. But if you do that bit by bit, just one powerful man sort of pushing for this, as opposed to actually organizing and putting in this work and doing this locally, it doesn't last very long.
But the political reality is, you were talking about Obama. Let me stick up for Obama. 2008 is the worst recession that we've had since the Great Depression. But there's a history when one party controls all of government, that you wind up with the throw the bums out phenomenon. 1974 with Richard Nixon, the Democrats swept. 1990, what was it, 94, and under Clinton, the Republicans swept out the Democrats. In 2006, under Bush, the Democrats had a major resurgence, and in 2010, the Republicans booted out the Democrats. So, I wonder if it's because of this frustration with ineffective government, the inability to cut a deal, the inability to have any vision that would come, frankly, on opposite sides of the political spectrum, that it's more of a throw the bums phenomenon out.
Yeah, but I think that is happening right now. For example, the Republican Party, as we knew it, is dead. It's unrecognizable. And not that I was that happy with the Republican Party that existed before.
It was a free trade against deficits.
But now nobody knows. It's the Trump white supremacy party.
Well, race is absolutely essential.
So that's one. Then the Democratic Party is going to a transformation too, because you have a new wave of young people, working class people, getting together, even without putting a specific agenda, but they already know what they don't want. And what they don't want is the same as before. And it's going through a transformation. I see that what is happening in the Democratic Party, when a colony is trying to gain the independence from the invader,
Puerto Rico.
Everybody in the Democratic Party,
right.
right. I'm Puerto Rican, that's why. So
we've talked about
the colony the colonized fight the empire, they work together, and that's what is happening with the Republican Party. If the Democratic Party wins the midterm elections, that's when you're going to have what usually happens in colonies after they become independent. They have a civil war. And that civil war, you're going to see it. And it's important to have the civil war. That civil war is going to happen in January when Pelosi comes, which is the old generation with the new generation, and you're going to see the war between the Democratic Party completely clear, that there will be no doubt. But that war, like Jefferson used to say, you need to shed some blood once in a while in order to have things moving.
Well,
that's exactly what is going to happen.
Political blood is different than physical blood.
Right. This is political now, yes.
Right.
But it's completely necessary. I think they're on track. I think that
you're arguing that it really is a combination of throw the bums out and generational. So that this is, I'm a child of the 1960s. What did we do if not kick out the Democratic establishment?
Well, people are angry at the Democratic leadership for selling out.
Exactly.
That's the problem. And the Clintons are at the heart of the sellout, both of them. So, and Obama is part of it too.
They eliminated welfare as we knew it. Democrats did it. The
Democrats, they allowed deindustrialization. Clinton was a big champion of globalization. He was a fan of trade pacts. People know that. There's a reason that in Michigan, 90,000 people left the top of the ballot blank when they went to vote.
Between Trump and Clinton.
Yeah. Now, can you imagine? So,
Well, what does that also say about the nature of the candidates that we as a country are both supporting as well as attracting? Who wants to have his underwear scrutinized?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Excuse me?
That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, would any of us? I don't know. Maybe some of you folks in the audience. Would any of you want to say, "Oh, I'm going to run for state senate, or I want to run for Congress, or I want to run for president"? Who wants to go through this scrutiny? This is horrifying.
A lot of people. Look at all the ones that are entering the race.
But they're going for, I'm going to say, almost too much the wrong reason. They're going for ego. They're going for self-gratification.
Well, those are always the reasons.
Fine. All right. I'm being prosaic. I get it. But at some point or another, we have to have people who have, they want the self-aggrandizement, but they also have the competence and the integrity to stand up for their convictions, to try to do the right thing, to try to bring disparate peoples together to say, look, we're all in this together, and you got a great idea, and you got a great idea, and he's got a great idea, and I got a great idea. Let's figure out how we can work together, as opposed to this.
But we're not all in this together.
But we are. Why?
We really are not.
Why?
There was a big, dramatic recession in 2008 when it slowly...
Are we having fun yet?
We slowly recovered, and when we pushed away the fog and the clouds, the financial sector was roaring and making so much money.
Yep.
And a lot of people had lost their homes, had lost their job. We're not all in this together.
And it did
Look
not
at
trickle
the people
down.
that benefit.
And it did not trickle down. I mean, the whole argument was if you save the financial system,
It did in New York.
it's the old rising tide.
It never
Yeah,
trickles
it
down.
did-
It never trickles down.
New York didn't have, Southeast Queens did, a few other places did. New York didn't have a recession. Forget a great recession. New York was fine because the banks were fine. And, you know.
We did have a lot of foreclosures in Southeast
certain
Queens.
areas. Yeah, absolutely. But New York, part of what confuses this, just didn't experience what the rest of the nation did with this because we're the capital of finance. And it's a pretty blue state, right? And so Chuck Schumer, he's not looking for a war on Wall Street. Elliot Spitzer, in fact, wasn't really looking for one. He signified at one, and you know, he's the son of a real estate billionaire, which is a traditional path into New York politics. But it's been a very different experience here than in the rest of the country. And because so much of the media is here, and they do think of it as flyover territory, that's one thing that I think is really confusing. But we have more debt now. Not more housing debt, but more total debt, and this is people, not the government. More total debt, more college debt, more auto loan debt
Government has more debt
than we did in
too.
2008.
Right.
We've now gone 40 years without any growth in real wages. 40 years, right? We have more and more debt, and we're still a little protected because the dollar is the world's reserve currency. So when we blew up the world in 2008, the world responded by dropping its dollars here and putting them into New York and into our real estate as a way of protecting them from the uncertainty that we've created. So there's still a little space because we have this currency, but you can see the breakdown of our politics. And to use it just as an example, like the paranoid politics of Argentina, that we're moving in that direction. And to get to what you were saying about the inability to argue in goodwill, that things move into claims of conspiracy and secret motives much more quickly than we used to. And finally, again, this happened over 40 years.
Some
no
of
one
that
cared
is
that much.
some of that is technological and the fragmenting of the media world in which we don't have common facts. We don't listen.
Right.
to the same
But this
people.
means that people can organize themselves. And you first saw this with Howard Dean, right? That you can raise money, you don't need the parties, and you don't need the traditional vetting and gatekeeping systems to do that. You can actually organize activists and voters, and that the parties that are supposed to provide that function stop really doing it. They ended up like Hollywood sets. They sort of advertised these services, but they weren't a serious or functional part of this that you needed. And TV and all the consultants who put money into that's become its own issue. And, you know, Trump bypassed a lot of that, and that was something that he did see and get to ahead of time. So we've had this giant advantage over the rest of the world. And the question is, do we try to keep it? Do we manage it to its decline? And at a time, by the way, when faith in globalism is breaking down, when no one in the U.S. really wants to go to World War III, as Trump said, over Montenegro, when everyone is dubious, and with some good reason, of like a new trade deal outside of the establishments, and the West, the coasts, and the money is dubious of a new trade deal with Asia, is asking questions about NAFTA. We need to start working out some new arrangements. And if you don't responsibly do that in reasonably short order, you open up this space for demagogues. And we had, you know, what Eric Hoffer pointed to, in like 40 years of flattening.
You don't have to go back to
down.
Eric Hoffer. We're right there now.
Yeah.
Trump.
Yes. It's remarkable and sad.
Yeah.
The absence of a middle, again, is there a middle? I mean, there's, you know, I know
No.
that you don't think there is a middle, that it's a kind of a, I mean, is it an ideological fight to the death? And when I say ideology, I don't want to undercut that there were people who were benefiting from the, you know, programmatically benefiting. This is not a pie in the sky ideology fight. There were real people, real poor people who are going to be benefit or hurt or, you know, hopefully helped. I mean, is this just a fight to the finish?
Well, listen, you know what always happens? This talk about we have to build the middle is always directed to Democrats on the left. Do we tell rich Republicans, like Governor Snyder of Michigan, that we have to build the middle? No, the middle is directed against Democrats. And the last time there was a big campaign to temper the Democratic Party, get it to move to the right, that was the Democratic Leadership Council. And it was a disaster. It was a complete disaster. So what we really need is political leaders who can identify the issues that are tearing people apart.
Well, at the risk of getting myself in trouble, was it a complete disaster? Was it a complete disaster? There was, much lower unemployment under President Clinton, who was the master of the DLC. He was the creation of the DLC. He was the master of triangulation, try to pull everybody together.
Yeah, but
you had lower unemployment, you had lower deficits, you had, a large increase in jobs.
But he was also creating the seed of what is happening now.
Absolutely.
The Glass-Steagall Act was
bingo,
eliminated
bingo.
by
that was the beginning of
by,
that and
by Clinton,
sorry.
which is something that comes from the Heritage Foundation, from the extreme right. He decided to get rid not only that, he also got rid of welfare as we know it.
The welfare.
Which has been completely transformed. There are students now at CUNY who have to go, who are on workfare, since he did that cannot complete the 4 years because they have to take a semester and they have to take time off to go to pick up caca in Central Park as part of the workfare program, and they're delaying the education, and the education is what creates workers and help the economy. So brilliant move by Clinton's. Glass-Steagall Act, workfare.
Crime Act.
Exactly. No, I mean, we can go on and on and on, but he created at the same time as the economy during that period of time that helped him to create those jobs. He was creating the seeds for what is happening now, and it was not the Republicans. It was a Democrat doing things that the Republicans wanted to do for a long time, and he did it. You know why he did it? Because I worked in doing voter registration in 1996, because he wanted to bring the right, the center of the right, to join him so he could win his second term. Nothing else. It was for political ambition to get his second term, because he knew that unless he got the Republicans moving a little bit with him, he wasn't going to be able to win the 1996 election after the disaster of the midterm election in 1994. That's why he makes all those moves.
I think the two biggest flaws under Clinton were, one, Glass-Steagall, and two, having dropped the ball entirely on bin Laden. The State Department totally dropped the ball, and that could have all been obviated had they actually been paying some attention. And that then lead up to lots of gold.
If you have like 4% growth, everything is fine. You don't have to think that much about who we are, because there's enough to go around. When things stop growing and you have to divvy up the spoils, that's when it gets complicated. The actual center is that most people don't care or want to think that much about this stuff. They don't want to be super active participants. When voter turnout is too high, that's a problem. It was highest in New York in '89 and '93 when Giuliani and Dinkins were having like their race war. It's fairly simple. So Clinton and every president tries to stimulate growth, and they know they're buying against future outcomes, right? And he tried to do the same thing Obama did. He gets there and he's like, let's do a health thing, a national health thing. He didn't get it. Obama did. In both cases, Republicans took control as a pushback, like your wave has gone far enough. Let's see what we can do as a corrective. Because he didn't, he ended up having, in a lot of ways, a more functional rest of his presidency, to that question of having some usable center. And the economy did keep growing. There was reasonable stability, and it was the last period of that. And then he leaves. The towers are hit, which bookends 1993, and the first bombing of the towers. We have an idiotic war that again, people who were just voting were born at about that time. And things have been on an obvious path of decline since. So he's sowed a lot of the seeds for what's gone wrong, and it's perfectly fair to look back and say that, but that was the last functional and functioning presidency we had in a lot of ways, and despite the impeachment craziness and Republicans no longer, in my view, playing fairly in any sort of ways and sort of setting us on the moment we're at, I just think it's dangerous to be too harsh about that, and it worries me about like the purge on the left going forward when our revisionism is this rapid. And I really don't like the Clintons, and I think that they were looters and had many other problems.
The economy did well. I agree. I'm not trashing what he did in terms of the economy.
On the left.
That when we get to this year's wave election, that the question of who a Republican is. So I'll use Cuomo as an example. Cuomo was the secretary of HUD under the Clintons. He's a two-term Democrat. He just dominated a Democratic primary against socialist Cynthia Nixon, right? And it is the heartfelt belief of every rising new voter that this guy is not a Democrat, that he's a closet Republican, that he's a complete bum, and that he's evil. I don't think he's been a very good governor, and I think he's probably a criminal. But that's a separate question.
And he's really very offensive. He has no charisma. I mean, that's why they don't like him.
No, they don't like him because he's meant to be a border case for expressing what a real Democrat or a real progressive is and saying it is not this. And so him and Bill de Blasio, who are frankly rather similar in a whole bunch of ways, you know, each of them uses the other as a bête noire. While Cuomo also does the same with Trump and says, I'm against the politics of division when he's not sending mailers smearing the Jewish beliefs of his primary opponent. It's unhealthy.
Yes, ma'am. Tell us your name and your campus.
I'm Victoria Fix. I go to John Jay College, and my question is, we're talking a lot about this divisiveness and our divided times. What happens next? How can we ensure that there is productivity after the election? Are we just going to fight about us being divided? How can we encourage better conversation in our classrooms?
If you see Republicans continuing, and if you see some of the, if you look around the country in the Florida governor's race and various races, the hard right candidate won the Republican nomination, and he's not as hard left, but the mayor of Tallahassee, Mr. Gillum, who was by far the furthest on the left of the Democratic candidates, and we've seen that elsewhere. I mean, are we? You know, is there any hope of getting things together?
Just participate in your local life. Pay attention to your schools, pay attention to the people around you, find the people who are actually in your neighborhood who are in some need. Build on that, and the more people do that, the healthier a place we're going to be in. To the extent we're doing shorthand in national politics and Spielberg effects where people are supposed to be representing millions of people, given the moment we're in, our politics are only going to get uglier. I don't think there's any shortcut to that.
Fighting against predatory politicians and their allies who are destroying constitutional democratic institutions in the United States is not a bad thing. If we are the ones that say, oh, we got to make nice, can't we all get together, blah, 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 and that won't stop them.
Let me ask you.
Look at what Trump is doing to the court.
Okay, it's not going to stop them, but at least we have a responsibility. So I'd like to ask, how many in the audience was surprised that that Trump got elected? How many? Be honest. Okay.
Everybody.
Why? Okay, you were all surprised. Well, maybe part of the surprise is the fact that we are not all versed enough in what's going on around us. It's not just the person down the block and around the corner from you. It's the person who's in a flyaway state or in somewhere else. And we as New Yorkers in particular have a responsibility for figuring out what else is happening around the world. It's not the little bubble that we live in. And I find this frustration all the time is dealing with people who say, well, Hillary should have won. Of course, it was a slam dunk, on and on and on.
I want to go to another question, but this raises the question, for want of a better term, the Susan Sarandon question, that it made no difference. If Bernie couldn't win, it made no difference if Clinton or Trump won. It made no difference whether Al Gore won in 2000 or George W. Bush won. You go back far enough, it made no difference if Jimmy Carter won or Ronald Reagan won. I think it made a big difference.
Well, I didn't know anybody who said that.
Well,
and I know a lot of people.
I do. Right.
I really do. I talk to them. I have a lot of friends. Nobody thought that Trump was going to win, but nobody said it wouldn't make any difference if he won. Moreover, he didn't win. He lost the popular vote by 3 million votes.
But he won by appealing to race with white working class
and
voters
with the help
in the Rust Belt.
You've got to read Kathleen Jemison's new book, and with the help of Russian trolls and hackers.
But also there
Pretty clear.
But also there was a negligence by the Clinton campaign.
Exactly.
How can you not campaign in Ohio? How can you not go to Michigan?
Yeah, but Jaime, you of all people, I think, would understand that the racial dog whistle was a critical aspect.
100%. It's part of that. but I don't think that that was
Which is
enough.
tied in with the economic deprivation
wait-
and the breakdown of manufacturing jobs, et cetera, et cetera.
I know, but
And
it's-
this changing demographic in the country.
But for example, if the Constitution of the United States had put the word democracy in the Constitution, had put the right to vote in the Constitution, and not invent that deal with slave owners, which is electoral colleges, it wouldn't have been an issue because then Hillary would have won by 3 million. The thing is that, you know, the reason why the word democracy is not in the Constitution of the United States and the right to vote is not in the Constitution of the United States? Because they didn't want to put it in the Constitution of the United States. Because they wanted to have a republic that basically was going to help the elites that were the people who created the Constitution. And now they will be very happy to see what is happening because that's what is happening now.
Let me go to another question. Please tell us your name and your campus and speak up, please.
My name is Jessica Sirico. I go to Hunter College, and that's actually a very good segue into my question, which is what role do you all feel disenfranchisement plays in this conversation?
When you say disenfranchisement, you mean people who can't vote and vote and
People that have been
and blocks
deliberately
to vote.
Oh, voter suppression.
boxed out of
That's
voting. Voter
voter,
suppression.
voter suppression.
So, real quick, local thing. In New York, a big reason that the Republicans have held the state Senate in a state that's naturally all Democratic at this point, right? And they can't win any of the full statewide races for attorney general, for controller, for lieutenant governor, for governor, is because prisoners who are all upstate, and that was Mario Cuomo's big job development program, count as you're allocating voters and where the districts are, even though they can't.
Just like with
vote
it was
there.
with slaves
Yep.
in the South.
So I think that's a pretty strong example of how this has played out. But past straight up disenfranchisement, which is easier to write about and express for a number of reasons, like strong voter discouragement is a powerful force. And it keeps people out of the habit of voting and participating and diminishes turnout in ways all politicians actually tend to like because it creates a predictable electorate. That once you're in, you
but it's also obviously redistricting. You can take the same 19 million people, and depending on how you divide them up, you can have a 100 vote, you know, a 65 vote majority, Democratic majority in the Assembly, and a 1 vote majority among Republicans in the Senate, depending, same 19 million people.
But very quickly, there are still laws that are Jim Crow laws that go before all this that are still in place. For example, in Florida, we're batting, there's going to be a referendum in November.
About letting ex-cons vote.
1.7 million eligible voters who cannot vote in Florida because they had a felony, and the laws that come from the Jim Crow era that are still in place, and they don't allow those voters to vote. Trump won Florida by 40,000 votes. Imagine if that 1.7, mostly black and brown, had been able to vote, Trump would have never received 30 electoral colleges in terms of the representation.
You know, that's very important because it's something that we can all do something about. The Republican Party and the Republican state parties, and especially Republicans in the state legislatures, have hit upon an ancient American practice, voter suppression, as a way of overcoming the disadvantage that comes from what is sometimes called the majority-minority electorate. And after these Kavanaugh hearings, I mean, women are not going to vote Republican. The Republican Party is in real trouble. It doesn't have an electorate which conceivably can have a stable majority in the future. And the way it is handling that problem is it's going into the state legislatures, it's getting laws requiring that people have voter IDs. In New Hampshire, they go after students have to have a special kind of ID for a domicile or a residence. I don't remember what it is. They're going after those groups in the Democratic electorate that they can justify through those people commit fraud. They say also there is no fraud. It's all it's all propaganda, and it's a big change that's occurring in the United States. And you know, you can't do anything about the Electoral College, I don't think.
Too tough to change.
Yeah, that's a very long road.
You would need a lot of states
Road
which
ahead.
benefit from it.
But you
to
can
vote
do
to change
something
it.
about these voter suppression laws and practices. And there are so many non-voters in the United States who could vote that we could change American electoral politics. Now, there'd be problems. We still have problems. We still have fossil fuels, the Koch brothers, the banks. It wouldn't be a happy democracy even then. But at least we would have a fulsome, flourishing electorate. And we could do that.
Does finding, very quickly, because I want to go to other questions, does finding a political center, is that a happy democracy?
Well, it's certainly going to be a heck of a lot better than what we got right now. I mean, I don't like waking up in the morning and putting the radio on or reading the paper. I mean, this is clearly taking us down along every metric in the wrong way that we want to go. It was working a lot better when, the civil rights law was created through bipartisanship. It was a Republican from Dirksen from Illinois and a Democrat from Montana. I mean, how often do you think these kinds of things happen? I mean, this is where we want to go a little bit further. I mean, NASA was created because we had a Republican president and we had a Democratic Congress. We had the CHIP law, the Children Health Insurance Program happened because of Ted Kennedy from Massachusetts, a Democrat, and Orrin Hatch, who was a Republican. I mean, these are the kinds of things that made society, our country, our collective country, better and better because we had the best of the intentions and the convictions from one side and the best from the other side coming together and making law that affected all of us.
Yes, sir. Tell us your name and your campus.
Hi there. My name is Solomon Shapiro, and I'm from Queens College. So my question is, as somebody who is kind of a centrist, I look more for the results of what a politician's going to say when they're on the campaign. What they say, are they going to, provide the results to back up their claims? So, do you see, as was alluded to, a lot of politicians go into this career for the power, for the prestige, and just to get their foot in the door and get on that national stage? So they'll say and do what they know will get them on that stage, as was the case in Donald Trump and also with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to some extent. So what do you think, as Mr. Steagall mentioned, of when a politician is unable to deliver on a result, they end up, getting pushed right out, and what's going to happen with the rest of the parties?
Let me just say that I've covered politics. I've been in politics. I think that there's ego. I think that there's kind of moral corruption. I think a lot of people in politics go into it because they believe in what they're doing. So I don't want to be. I'm skeptical. I don't want to be cynical. But go ahead, Harry.
So politicians are people, right? And
corporations too.
Corporations are made of people. Are made of people, and people are going to take a lot of what they can within any given system. And they have some better angels and a lot of worse ones, and you build a wall, and it takes a long time, and there's always things eating at that wall, termites, if you like, or people just taking bits of it. So you have a system that holds them accountable, and that system is just made up of people. And I think we reached a big period of sort of magical thinking that took us through multiple wars, nearly crashing the world economy, and a bunch of other stuff where it's like, oh, this is bad, or it seems precarious, but our systems are working, even when it was very obvious they weren't. Going back to the Clinton impeachment, and then to Bush versus Gore, and Roger Stone there, and a bunch of other stuff. It's been sort of obvious that our supports are breaking down. And then one important thing with Republicans right now, if you don't see any long-term path to victory, right, you start getting into asteroid mentality. So there are all those asteroid 2016 bumper stickers because the option was the Clintons. But if you're the Republican Party and you have this moment and you have power and you know that nationally at least it's a rearguard action, and you might have more of an advantage in the states because Obama was so remiss in dealing with any of that, you think differently if there's a future, if you want to be there in 20 years. If you're like, there is no chance that I'm holding this office and this power in 5 years, even if you're a principled person and you believe in everything you're saying, what you vote for, what you behave, the sorts of deals you make are very different.
I think one of the,
very quickly.
One of the things we didn't talk about are fundamentally all the dark money issue and term limits, and because systemically we have a problem that allows human beings to become as bad as they can be without somebody stopping it. Until we think through that system a little bit better, all of this is going to continue.
Yes, ma'am. Quickly, please.
Hi, my name I'm Magan Jean-Louis. I study at Macaulay Honors College at Brooklyn. So I have a two-part question. The first is, what do you think is the role of media in terms of destroying the center? So if we look at Fox News being one of the most watched channels, if we look at the fact that there's really no left-wing side to that, and then the other part is, I actually did want to ask about term limits. What would that do to change the system?
Very quickly. You want to?
Well, the question, your first question at least, you had the answer in the question. The media is, when you go to an airport anywhere in the country, the station that's on the TV monitor is Fox News. The whole country is watching Fox
It's
News.
an FAA regulation now.
No, it's always CNN.
I'm sorry.
So the media is a big problem. And Trump, of course, is determined to make it a worse problem by denouncing those of the media who are not already controlled by the big media conglomerates.
Let's leave term limits for another argument because it's a very interesting question. Very quickly, we only have a minute left.
My name is Fatima Mohammed. I'm from John Jay. And my question is, how do we create a middle ground under an administration that has no respect for the truth?
Is middle ground conceivable under a Trump administration? We have 45 seconds left.
Well, there is a dialectical process that has to take place in any exercise to get to the truth or close to the truth of something. So you have a thesis, you have an antithesis, you debate it, then you go for a synthesis. You know, you have to go through a dialectical process in order to get to a middle point, if there is going to be a middle point. And I think that there are some proposals that are being made that are skipping that debate, that struggle that has to happen in order to finesse the arguments.
I'm going to have to cut us off there. I always make deadline. I want to thank you all, and we'll see you next time on CUNY Forum. Thank you.